She walked into the dinner party carrying a child and a secret powerful enough to destroy every smile in that room. Picture this: crystal glasses clinking under golden chandeliers, a man in an expensive tailored suit adjusting his cufflinks with quiet satisfaction, a woman's hand gently resting on a swollen belly that holds new life, and across the room, a hostess smiling wide, hiding something cruel behind her perfect teeth. They invited her to humiliate her. They wanted her to see what they had become, what she had supposedly lost. They never imagined she owned the very ground beneath their feet, the walls surrounding their arrogance, the company that signed their paychecks. This is a story of betrayal, yes, but it's also about a quiet woman who understood that the most powerful move isn't always the loudest one. It's about a truth that waited patiently in the shadows until the perfect moment to step into the light. Stay till the end, because this ending doesn't shout. It silences. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, you might be asking yourself some questions right now. Who is this woman, really? What kind of person walks into a room full of people who want to see her broken? Why would a wealthy man invite his pregnant ex-wife to a dinner party hosted by him and his new lover? And how did she become the owner of the company he proudly works for without him knowing? How does something like that even happen? These aren't simple questions, and the answers aren't what you'd expect. This is not a story about revenge, not in the traditional sense. It's about timing. It's about dignity. It's about power that doesn't announce itself, power that waits in silence, watching, knowing that truth always finds its moment. And when that moment comes, no words are needed. The revelation speaks for itself. Let me take you back to where it all began, to a time when things looked very different. Her name was Evelyn Carter. If you met her, you'd notice her calm demeanor first, the way she listened more than she spoke, the intelligence in her eyes that suggested she was always thinking 3 steps ahead. Evelyn married young, the way some people do when they believe they've found their person, their partner, their forever. She believed in building a life together, in supporting each other's dreams, in being the foundation upon which a marriage could stand strong against whatever storms came their way. She worked long hours to support them financially while her husband Richard pursued his career ambitions. She gave up opportunities of her own, turned down job offers, postponed her own dreams because she thought that's what love meant. That's what partnership required. Late nights when he came home stressed, she was there with encouragement. When he doubted himself, she reminded him of his strengths. When he needed money to invest in his image, his wardrobe, his network, she provided it without hesitation. Evelyn believed in building together. She didn't know she was building alone. Richard Carter was her husband, and on paper, he seemed like a good match. He was ambitious, driven, always talking about the next promotion, the next opportunity, the next level of success he was going to reach. But there was something else about Richard, something that became clearer as the years went on. He was image-driven in a way that went beyond normal professional ambition. What people thought of him mattered more than who he actually was. The car he drove, the watch on his wrist, the restaurants he was seen at, these things defined him in his own mind. He was easily influenced by whoever seemed successful, whoever had status, whoever could elevate his position in the social hierarchy he'd constructed in his head. And as he climbed higher in his career, as his salary increased and his title became more impressive, something shifted. He began to believe that his success made him untouchable, that he deserved more, that he had outgrown the woman who had been there from the beginning. He started coming home later. He stopped asking about Evelyn's day. The conversations that used to flow easily between them became transactional, brief, distant. Evelyn noticed, of course she noticed. But she told herself it was just stress, just the demands of his job, just a phase they'd work through together. Then there was Vanessa, confident, flashy, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made sure everyone knew she was there. She worked in Richard's office, always impeccably dressed, always laughing just a little too loud at his jokes, always finding reasons to stay late when he stayed late. Vanessa was obsessed with status in her own way. To her, Wealth equaled worth. The expensive handbag wasn't just an accessory, it was proof of value. The luxury vacation wasn't just a trip, it was evidence of a life well lived. She saw Richard's rising career, his growing income, his connections, and she saw opportunity. She believed she deserved to be with someone successful, someone important, and Richard, flattered by her attention, validated by her admiration, began to see himself through her eyes. In Vanessa's gaze, he wasn't just successful, he was exceptional. He wasn't just doing well, he was destined for greatness. And Evelyn, quiet, supportive Evelyn, began to look like a relic of his past, someone who reminded him of who he used to be rather than who he was becoming. The affair started subtly. A lunch that ran long, a business trip that required an extra day, text messages that were quickly deleted. Evelyn felt it before she knew it, that familiar feeling when something in your relationship shifts and the ground beneath you doesn't feel quite as solid. But she didn't want to believe it. She told herself she was being paranoid, insecure, that she should trust her husband. Until the night she found the messages on his phone. Not because she was snooping, but because he'd left it on the kitchen counter and it kept lighting up with notifications from someone saved under a man's name in his contacts. The messages were explicit, intimate, planning their next meeting with the casual ease of two people who'd been doing this for a while. Evelyn felt her world collapse in that moment. Not with a dramatic crash, but with a quiet, devastating certainty. Everything she'd believed about her marriage, about her partnership, about the man she'd supported and loved, all of it crumbled into dust. If you're still with me on this journey, type "I'm here" in the comments right now. Let me know you're invested in Evelyn's story. When she confronted Richard, he didn't even try to deny it. Maybe he was relieved to have it out in the open. Maybe he'd been wanting an exit for a while and this gave him one. He said things that people say. In these moments, things that are meant to justify the unjustifiable. He said he'd changed, that they'd grown apart, that he needed someone who understood his new life, his new level of success. He actually used those words, new level of success, as if achievement gave him permission to discard loyalty. Evelyn stood there in their kitchen, the kitchen they'd chosen together, with the dishes they'd picked out together, and she realized she was looking at a stranger. This man who could rationalize betrayal, who could make his affair sound like personal growth. She didn't know him. Maybe she never had. The divorce came fast. Richard wanted it handled quickly, cleanly, quietly. He had an image to maintain after all, and a messy divorce wouldn't look good. His lawyers were aggressive. They tried to make it seem like Evelyn had contributed nothing to the marriage, that she was entitled to minimal support. They painted her as someone who'd been lucky to be married to an ambitious man, like Richard. The whole process was humiliating. Standing in lawyers' offices, listening to strangers dissect your marriage, reduce your years of support and sacrifice to line items on a financial statement, watching your husband sit across the table looking impatient to be done with you. Richard chose image over loyalty. He chose ease over integrity. And throughout it all, he seemed to believe that Evelyn would be fine, that she'd just quietly fade into her new life while he moved forward into his. He left her with silence, awkward, cold, final silence. No real apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done for him, no gratitude for the years she'd invested in his success. Just papers to sign and a check that was supposed to represent the end of their shared life. And never, not once, did he notice that she left with something else. Something he couldn't see, couldn't quantify, couldn't understand. Because Richard never paid attention to the details that didn't directly benefit him. He never asked about Evelyn's family, about the inheritance she'd received years ago from her late father, about the quiet investments she'd made with money that was hers alone. He never noticed because he never thought Evelyn was capable of anything significant without him. That was his first mistake. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Evelyn realized something that changed everything. She was pregnant. She sat in her small apartment, the one she'd moved into after leaving the house they'd shared, staring at the test in her hand, and a wave of emotions crashed over her. Fear, because she was now going to be a single mother. Sadness, because this child would grow up without a father who wanted them. But also, surprisingly, relief. Because she realized in that moment that this child was hers, completely, entirely hers. No shared custody with a man who'd proven himself untrustworthy. No complicated explanations to a child about why Daddy left. Just her and this baby, starting fresh, building something real. She decided right then, sitting on her bathroom floor, that she would not tell Richard. He'd made his choice. He'd walked away, and she would let him stay. Walked away. This child deserved better than a father who might show up out of obligation, who might use them as a pawn in some future ego game, who might disappoint them the way he'd disappointed her. So she stayed quiet. She moved on, and she began to build her life again. But here's what no one knew. Here's the part of the story that was unfolding in complete silence while Richard and Vanessa celebrated their new relationship and his continued career success. Years before the affair, before the divorce, before everything fell apart, Evelyn's father had passed away. He was a good man, a careful man, a man who'd worked his entire life in business and had made some smart investments along the way. When he died, he left Evelyn shares in a small, struggling firm. It wasn't much at the time, maybe worth enough to be meaningful, but not life-changing. Most people would have sold those shares, taken the cash, moved on. But Evelyn, who'd always been smarter than anyone gave her credit for, who'd studied business in college before Richard convinced her she didn't need to work, she saw something in that struggling firm. She saw potential. So she held on to those shares. More than that, she started paying attention. She attended shareholder meetings that most people skipped. She read every quarterly report. She made suggestions, small ones at first, about operational efficiency and market positioning. The board members, mostly older men who didn't expect much from a young woman they saw as just an inherited shareholder, were surprised by her insights. Gradually, they started listening to her, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, that struggling firm started to turn around. Evelyn invested more of her own money, carefully, strategically. She encouraged mergers with complementary companies. She pushed for innovation in their product lines. And over the course of several years, while she was busy supporting Richard's career and managing their household, she was also quietly, methodically, building something of her own. The firm grew. It merged with another company, then another. It expanded into new markets. Its value increased exponentially, and through careful management of her investments and voting rights, Evelyn maintained majority control. She did all of this anonymously, through trusts and legal structures that kept her name off public documents. She did it because she liked the work, because it gave her a sense of purpose beyond being Richard's supportive wife, and because some part of her, even back then, understood the value of having something that was entirely her own. She never told Richard about any of it. It wasn't that she was hiding it exactly. It's that he never asked. He never showed interest in her family's business history, never inquired about her father's estate, never wondered what she did with her time when he was at work. So she simply didn't mention it. And as the company grew, as it became more successful and more prominent in its industry, Richard remained completely unaware. Then came the final piece of the puzzle. The company where Richard worked. The company he was so proud to be part of. The company that had given him his impressive title and his comfortable salary and his status among his peers. That company was struggling. It needed capital, new leadership, a strategic partner. Evelyn's firm, now a major player in the industry, was approached about a merger. The numbers made sense. The strategic fit was perfect. Evelyn, consulting with her board, agreed to the merger. The deal went through. And just like that, without fanfare, without announcement, without Richard having any idea, the company he worked for became part of the company Evelyn owned. While he climbed a ladder he didn't own, she owned the building, his salary, his bonuses, his health insurance, his retirement contributions, All of it was now, technically, coming from her. And he had absolutely no idea. Evelyn could have revealed this at any time. She could have walked into his office, could have made her ownership public, could have embarrassed him the way he'd embarrassed her. But that's not who she was. She stayed anonymous as the majority shareholder. She let the existing management structure continue. She made decisions through proxies and board votes. She focused on growing her business and preparing for her baby. She moved forward with her life. Until the invitation arrived. 6 months after the divorce, 4 months into her pregnancy, a heavy cream envelope appeared in Evelyn's mailbox. Expensive paper, the kind that announced importance. Inside was an invitation to a dinner party. The hosts, Richard Carter and Vanessa Monroe. The occasion, a celebration of success, of partnership, of their new life together. The dress, code, formal. The subtext, unmistakable. Come see what you lost. Evelyn held that invitation for a long time, reading it over and over. She knew exactly what this was. This wasn't a genuine invitation. This was a performance. Richard and Vanessa wanted an audience for their happiness. More specifically, they wanted her to be the audience. They wanted her to walk into their lavish home, see their expensive furnishings, meet their successful friends, witness their perfect coupling, and feel small, feel diminished, feel like she'd been left behind while they soared ahead. Vanessa had actually insisted on inviting her. Richard had mentioned it to a colleague who later told someone else who eventually told someone who knew Evelyn. Vanessa had said, and these were apparently her exact words, "Invite her. Let her see what you upgraded to." That's how they saw this dinner party, as a chance to flaunt their wealth, to show Evelyn what she'd supposedly lost, to feed their egos with her discomfort. It was cruel in that particularly calculating way, not violent or overtly aggressive, just designed to make someone feel less than. Evelyn's first instinct was to throw the invitation away, to refuse to participate in their little show. But then something shifted in her thinking. She looked down at her growing belly. She thought about the company she owned, the business she'd built, the power she held that they knew nothing about. And she realized something important. Some truths deserve witnesses, not because they need to be shouted or proven or defended, but because they simply need to be seen. Evelyn decided to accept the invitation, not out of anger, not out of a desire for revenge, not to hurt them the way they'd clearly hoped to hurt her, but because she understood that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe arranges moments of perfect clarity, moments when reality and perception align in a way that reveals truth without words. She RSVP'd yes, and as the date approached, she prepared herself not for battle, but for simply showing up as exactly who she was. The night of the dinner party arrived with cold autumn rain tapping against windows. Evelyn stood in front of her mirror, choosing her outfit carefully. Not the most expensive thing she owned, not designer labels or flashy jewelry. Just a simple, elegant dress that accommodated her pregnancy. Comfortable shoes, her mother's pearl necklace. She looked at herself and saw not someone trying to prove anything, but someone who knew her worth regardless of who recognized it. She drove to the address on the invitation, a large house in an expensive neighborhood, the kind of place that was meant to impress. Cars lined the street, expensive models, sleek and polished. She parked her modest sedan and walked to the front door, her hand instinctively moving to her belly, feeling her baby move inside her. The door opened to reveal lavish visuals that were exactly what she'd expected. Crystal, chandeliers casting warm light over marble floors. Guests in silk dresses and tailored suits, holding champagne flutes, laughing with the performative ease of people at high-end social gatherings. Servers in black and white uniforms, circulating with trays of appetizers. Classical music playing softly in the background, everything carefully curated, everything expensive, everything designed to communicate success and status and arrival. And there, near the grand staircase, stood Richard and Vanessa. Richard in a suit that probably cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent, his hair perfectly styled, his smile confident and broad. Vanessa beside him in a dress that sparkled under the lights, her hand possessively on Richard's arm, her laugh carrying across the room. When Evelyn entered, there was a momentary pause. Not a dramatic movie moment where everyone stops and stares, but a subtle shift in the room's energy. Heads turned, whispers started. Because here was the ex-wife, pregnant and alone, walking into her replacement's party. Here was the woman who was supposed to feel humiliated, who was supposed to serve as a contrast to Vanessa's glamour and Richard's success. Evelyn walked further into the room, calm, dignified, her posture straight despite her pregnancy. She accepted a glass of water from a server. She smiled politely at guests who approached her with that particular kind of curiosity people have when they sense drama. Vanessa spotted her and walked over, Richard trailing slightly behind. The smile on Vanessa's face was bright and sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk. "Evelyn," she said, her voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You came. You look comfortable." The emphasis on that last word. The subtle implication that comfortable meant frumpy, unfashionable, less than. Evelyn smiled genuinely. "Thank you. Comfort is important to me these days." Vanessa's eyes dropped to Evelyn's belly, then back up. "Motherhood changes everything, doesn't it? Your whole life becomes about someone else. No time for yourself anymore. No time for career or ambitions or any of those things we used to think mattered." The condescension was thinly veiled. Richard stood there, uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact with Evelyn. He'd probably imagined this moment would feel triumphant, but standing here, seeing his pregnant ex-wife face to face, it just felt awkward and slightly shameful. Evelyn responded simply, "Motherhood is a privilege. I'm grateful for it." She didn't engage with the bait, didn't defend herself, didn't explain. She just stood there, present, unshaken. Vanessa's smile flickered slightly, frustrated by the lack of reaction. She'd wanted tears or anger or visible discomfort, something to validate the cruelty of this invitation. Instead, she got calm acceptance. The three of them stood in this strange triangle for another moment before a guest interrupted, pulling Richard away to discuss some business matter. Vanessa excused herself to greet other arrivals, and Evelyn moved further into the party, observing, waiting. The evening progressed with the usual dinner party rhythms, conversations about vacations and investments and industry gossip. Vanessa made several more subtle digs throughout the evening, comments about how wonderful it was to be with someone ambitious, how important it was to have a partner who was going places, how lucky she felt to be building a life with someone successful. Each comment designed to make Evelyn feel inadequate, to remind her of what Richard had left her for. But Evelyn didn't react. She ate her dinner. She made polite conversation with the guests around her. She existed in that space without apology or explanation. Then came the moment. Over dessert, a guest, someone senior in Richard's company, mentioned casually, "I heard the company owner might join us tonight. Haven't met them yet. They keep a low profile." Richard's face lit up. This was clearly part of the evening. He'd been anticipating. "Yes," he said proudly. "I've been hoping to meet them as well. The merger has been incredible for the company. Whoever runs that firm knows exactly what they're doing." He spoke with that particular tone of someone who believes they're close to power, who thinks that working for a successful company makes them successful by association. Vanessa beamed beside him, clearly enjoying his moment of pride. "The owner should be here," the guest continued, looking around the room. They confirmed attendance. Richard straightened his tie, looking toward the door, expecting someone impressive to walk in, someone powerful and commanding, probably male, probably older, someone who would validate his sense of his own importance by association. Evelyn set down her dessert fork. She felt her baby kick, as if sensing what was about to happen. And then, From across the room, a board member she recognized, someone from her own company, began walking toward their table. Toward her. The board member, an older gentleman named Thomas who'd worked with Evelyn for years, approached with a respectful smile. "Ms. Carter," he said formally, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "I hope you've been enjoying your evening. I wanted to check if you'd like to proceed with the announcement now, or if you prefer to wait until after dinner." Silence. Not complete silence. Conversations continued in other parts of the room. But at their table, at Richard's carefully orchestrated celebration, there was sudden, profound quiet. Richard's face showed confusion. Vanessa's smile was still frozen in place. The other guests at the table looked between Evelyn and Thomas, trying to understand what was happening. "Miss Carter?" Richard repeated, his voice uncertain. He looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months. "Thomas is addressing you." Thomas turned to Richard, his expression professional. "Of course. Ms. Carter is the majority owner of Carter Industries. She's the one who approved the merger with your company." Evelyn watched Richard's face change. Confusion to disbelief, to dawning realization, to something that looked like horror. She saw him do the math, saw him connect the dots. His company had merged with Carter Industries. She was Evelyn Carter, the Carter and Carter Industries. The owner, his boss's boss's boss. The person whose decisions determined his salary, his benefits, his employment, his status, everything he'd been so proud of. Vanessa let out a small laugh, nervous, like this had to be a joke. Then she looked at Evelyn's calm face, at Thomas's respectful demeanor, at the way other board members from Carter Industries were now approaching their table, nodding deferentially to Evelyn. The laugh died in her throat. Richard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. What could he possibly say? In that moment, as Evelyn sat there quietly, visibly pregnant, unadorned, simply present, the entire room rearranged itself. The power dynamics they'd all assumed, the social hierarchy Richard and Vanessa had been performing all evening, it all inverted in an instant. The other guests at the table began to whisper. Word spread quickly through the party. The owner, the ex-wife, was the owner. The pregnant woman they'd been subtly pitying all evening actually owned the company, controlled the board, made the decisions. Richard sat frozen, his successful smile completely gone, replaced by an expression of devastation. He was realizing everything at once. His promotions hadn't been purely based on merit. They'd been approved by her company. His salary came from her profits. His impressive office was in her building. His status, the thing he valued most, had been unknowingly granted and maintained by the woman he'd discarded. Every time he'd bragged about his company, about his position, about his success, he'd actually been bragging about her. Evelyn had revealed, nothing with malice. Thomas's approach had been professional courtesy, checking with the owner about a standard announcement. She hadn't planned this dramatic moment, hadn't orchestrated it for maximum impact. She'd simply accepted a dinner invitation and existed as herself. The revelation happened naturally, inevitably, because truth doesn't need manipulation to be powerful. It just needs to be seen. Richard stared at her across the table. "You," he started, his voice hoarse. "You knew. You knew when you came here." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "I knew who I was, Richard. That's not the same thing as coming here to prove it to you." Vanessa found her voice, shrill and defensive. "This is ridiculous. Why would you come here if you're so successful? Why would you subject yourself to this?" Evelyn stood slowly, gracefully, despite her pregnancy. The room watched her. "I didn't come to embarrass anyone," she said clearly, her voice carrying in the now quiet space. "I came to remind myself who I am, who I was before you." She looked at Richard. "And who I'll continue to be after. Thank you for the dinner." She walked toward the door. Guests parted to let her through. Board members nodded respectfully. Thomas moved to escort her. And behind her, She left Richard sitting at his celebration dinner, surrounded by guests who now looked at him differently, next to a woman who'd chosen him for his status, only to discover it wasn't really his at all. As Evelyn reached the door, she heard it. Applause. One person started clapping, slowly, then another. But it wasn't for Richard anymore. It wasn't for his success or his achievements or his carefully constructed image. The applause, scattered and uncertain as it was for her. For the quiet dignity of her exit. For the reveal none of them had seen coming. For the woman who'd owned power without needing to announce it. Richard was left at his own party, surrounded by applause that no longer belonged to him. Recognition that wasn't for him. Respect that had quietly, irrevocably shifted to someone else. Evelyn drove home through the rain, her hand steady on the wheel. She didn't feel triumphant exactly. She didn't feel like she'd won something. She just felt clear, certain, like she'd closed a door that had needed closing. She thought about her baby, about the life they'd build together, about the company she'd continue to grow, about the woman she'd proven herself to be, not to Richard or Vanessa or anyone at that party, but to herself. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it builds slowly in silence, brick by brick, decision by decision. Sometimes it's held by people who don't announce it, don't perform it, don't need validation for it. And when it's finally seen, when the truth is revealed, it doesn't need to shout or gloat or grind anyone into the ground. It just stands there, undeniable, and speaks once. That's enough. If you were Evelyn, would you have gone to that dinner? Would you have walked into that room knowing what you knew? Or would you have stayed away and let them have their moment of cruel celebration? How would you feel if the person you'd supported, who'd left you for someone else, turned out to be succeeding because of infrastructure you'd built without them knowing? Think about the times in your own life when you've been underestimated, when people have assumed you were less capable, less powerful, less significant than you actually were. Did you feel the need to prove them wrong immediately? Or did you understand the value of quiet work, of building something real regardless of who noticed? Comment your thoughts below. And subscribe for stories that reveal quiet power, deep truths, and unforgettable endings. Because some stories don't end loudly. They echo.